your trusted guide in the world of U.S. immigration. We provide clear immigration news and insights and connect you with experienced attorneys who can answer your questions and guide you through the process. From visas to green cards, asylum to citizenship, we help you find the right legal expertise so you can move forward with confidence. ImmigrationQuestion.com. Real news, real answers, real quick. Stay tuned. We go live in 30 seconds.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's live webinar brought to you by ImmigrationQuestion.com, your trusted source for immigration news, expert legal insights, and real-time conversations with experienced immigration attorneys. My name is Max Castro, and I'll be your host for today's important session, E-2 Visa Success Strategies from Application to Approval. For many entrepreneurs and investors, the E-2 visa provides a unique opportunity to live and work in the United States while building a business. But approval is not automatic. The process can be complex and the requirements demanding, and the risks are high. That's why we are here today to give you insider knowledge, proven strategies, and the confidence to present the strongest possible application. We are honored to be joined today by attorney Tiffney Johnson, an experienced immigration attorney and former U.S. Department of State consular officer. With over 17 years of insider experience on both sides of the immigration process, she brings a wealth of knowledge about what decision makers look for, what pitfalls to avoid, and how to increase your chances of success. Today, she'll share practical strategies for navigating the E-2 process with clarity and confidence. We're pleased to have you today. Attorney Johnson, you're welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Of course. Well, before we dive in a quick but important reminder, Immigration Question is a two-in-one platform that connects users with licensed immigration attorneys, and we are not a law firm and are not affiliated with AILA or USCIS. All legal services are provided independently by attorneys in our network. Let's dive right in. Attorney Johnson,
right.
To begin, can you tell us what the E-2 visa is and who qualifies for it?
Okay, so just to start off, just to clarify, everything I'm going to be talking about is regarding E-2 investors, not E-2 employees. So with that in mind, just keep that in mind with regards to everything I'm going to be saying today. So the E-2 is a non-immigrant visa, and it is indefinitely renewable. And most importantly, it is reserved for citizens of countries with which the United States has E-2 treaties. And so that list, if you just Google E-2 treaty countries, you will find it quite easily on the Department of State website. And also there are a limitation if people have paid for citizenship. Certain countries do allow basically to pay a fee. You can become a citizen. And if that country has an E-2 treaty, there are other restrictions that would apply to you if you obtain your citizenship through those means. It is not a petition-based category. It allows for direct consular processing, although if you change status, you can use the petition process, but it doesn't require it. So it makes it a much more streamlined process if you are applying from overseas, because you don't have to wait for a petition to be approved. E-2s are typically smaller businesses that are scalable, and they intend to be the kind of business that the investor is going to actively manage.
And from your recent experience, what trends are you seeing with E-2 visa approvals and adjudications?
Well, recently, I am definitely seeing a stricter, more attention paid to the non-immigrant element of the E-2, meaning that even E-2 is not a dual intent visa. So if someone does have an intent to immigrate to the US, just like other kinds of non-immigrant visa categories, that will be evaluated in the E-2 interview. And now that is becoming more strict. So what I'm seeing is applicants who have had prior changes of status, long stays in the United States, or filed extensions are being scrutinized much more heavily regarding whether their intent to return to their home country after the E-2 is finished. Although E-2 is held by regulation to one of the lower standards of the evaluation as to whether someone has ties to their home country. I'm also seeing a more in-depth assessment, it's kind of in the same vein, when you have dependents coming with you, that officers are more heavily scrutinizing the business's ability to support you and your family rather quickly upon your arrival in the US, or that you potentially have other means of support like savings or whatever while your business is becoming active and revenue generating. But other than that, I would say the approval rate remains high for applicants who are well documented and who meet the criteria.
Thank you so much, Attorney. And what would you say are the most critical elements for USCIS or consular officers to look for when evaluating an E-2 application?
So it is important to know that if you're working with an attorney, the strategies are different when someone is filing a case with USCIS versus consular processing. But since this is primarily a process that is outlined in Department of State regulations very specifically, that's what I'm going to speak to now. But note that your attorney may focus on one area more than another, depending on the way that you're applying and in the location you're applying, the trends as to what that specific location seems to really pay more attention to. One is source of funds. Source of funds is a big deal for E-2. Although it can be proven quite easily, especially if you've earned your money just through employment and savings. But it is a criteria. And I actually don't think any of these are more heavily weighted than others. They're all equally important, and not meeting one of them can result in denial of your application. One is, of course, you have to show your controlling interest in the company. So you have to own at least 50% of your E-2 company. You have to be qualified to run the E-2 company. And that means you have a background in entrepreneurship or a background in some other kind of field adjacent to your E-2. Also, but I do have people who are franchise owners. They haven't ever owned a franchise, but they've received training through their franchise and they're qualified. You have to have knowledge of the business. I think that is not a specific element outlined in the regulations, but it goes to showing that you are qualified to run the business. You're going to be asked a lot of questions about your business. And so you really need to know in-depth information about the industry, your business, and the business model. They're going to evaluate, as I mentioned before, your immigration history. They want to know that also your business has the potential to employ people. So that is one of the main purposes of the E-2. I mean, that is pretty much the purpose of the E-2, is to create employment in the US. So your business has to be able to generate employment, and your business model has to be something that lends itself to employment generation. They would look for realistic financial projections that are backed up by real revenue, real revenue transactions, meaning if you have a retail store, how much of each kind of category of product do you expect to sell? How much will you spend on your employees? And you don't want to have things missing from your projections, and you want to know what your projections are and how they were calculated. So that's really, really important. And one that is the two I think that give people one of the more difficulties in here are that the funds are committed, your investment funds committed. The committed means spent. That's pretty much what it means. And that your business is operational, which that definition is different if you're buying an existing business versus if you're opening a new business, but it still has to meet the definition of being operational.
Thank you so much for giving us better clarity on this, Attorney. Many applicants struggle with proving that their investment is substantial. What practical guidance can you give on documenting and presenting investment funds effectively?
Okay, so substantiality is not a specific number. It's not a, and that's a common misconception about the E-2 visa. Substantiality is different for every business. And so the amount that is going to be considered substantial depends on the type of business and the industry in which you're going to be starting your business. For example, if you were starting a restaurant, substantiality is probably going to be, probably a $250,000 investment, because if you think of all the things you would need to open a restaurant, you need licensing, you need tables, you need so many things. It's very expensive. Versus if you were opening a bookkeeping business, your overhead is much lower. It's primarily a service-based business. You're going to need some office space and desks and laptops, and you may even have virtual employees. You may even not need a lot of things like that. So substantiality for a business like that will be much lower. But the thing to remember is that substantiality and the operational evaluation of the business as to whether it's operational, they go together. So what's it going to take to get a restaurant to be ready to open its doors within a short period of time after you arrive, versus what would it cost to get a bookkeeping business to that level? Which a bookkeeping business, you can have an office, some desks, laptops, marketing, maybe one employee, and you've started. Whereas with a restaurant, obviously that's not the case. So those two things go together and are evaluated together.
We're curious, attorney, as both an attorney and an accountant, how do you see financial documentation playing a role in strengthening or weakening an E-2 petition?
So financial documentation is really important. And one of the challenges is that many of the consulates, I would say pretty much all of the ones that I routinely work with, have page limitations as to how much you can submit with your initial application. And so you have to really decide, okay, what is the most important financial information to include? What should I exclude? And they may come back and ask you for that on a secondary, after you've submitted your application, come back and ask you for the things you had to omit from your application due to page limitations. So it's really important that it's concise, it's easy to understand. And this is also because these officers, many of them have no business background, right? And so you want the financial information to be easily understandable to a layperson who may not have a business background. And so I think this is where me being an accountant has helped me prepare these E-2s, because, and also maybe it makes it challenging because, you want to make it where the person can understand it. But I have trained officers that had backgrounds in, political science or whatever to read these kinds of documents. But it's up to the applicant to make that job easier on the officers, so they don't have to, look for someone in the office that might understand complicated financial statements. So making your financial documentation really understandable and clear is important. Highlighting your bank statements, labeling things, separating investments versus operating expenses. That's something that I usually will delineate very clearly, because investment counts toward that substantiality test, whereas operating expenses show your business is operating, right? You also want your business plans tied, like I said before, to specific revenue generating activities. If you're going to be opening a pet grooming business, how many dogs are you going to wash in the first year? And is that realistic? How does that number tie to your financial projections? They shouldn't be just financial projections. Oh, I think my business will make $250,000 in year one. Okay, what are you doing to make that $250,000? How much marketing are you going to have to do to get that much business? And does that line up with your industry as far as, for the size of your business, generating those revenue numbers? Everything needs to make a lot of sense within the context of your industry and the size of your business. And most importantly, you need to be able to explain your business plan, your financial, you have to be able to explain it. So if you've had it prepared by someone else, you need to ask them, how did you come up with these numbers or these projections? Because you're the only one in the interview that's going to have to explain it.
Thank you for this enlightening conversation, attorney. To everyone joining us from Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn, thank you for being here. Whether you're a legal professional, community advocate, or just someone looking to understand immigration better, we're grateful to have you. And if this is your first time with us, welcome. We are immigrationquestion.com, a meeting ground between immigration attorneys and individuals seeking answers to immigration questions. Our 2-in-1 platform is built with outstanding features to help simplify the immigration process. Though we are not affiliated with AILA, we are trusted by many AILA attorneys who use our platform. With immigrationquestion.com, you can also ask your immigration questions for free in any language and get connected with a licensed attorney for legal guidance. And yes, just like many of our users, you may also receive a free confidential initial consultation. Just visit www.immigrationquestion.com to learn more. And it gets better. We just launched our new mobile app designed to make access even easier, whether you're a user or an attorney. We have amazing news. ImmigrationQuestion.com is now BBB accredited. We're proud to announce that ImmigrationQuestion.com has earned Better Business Bureau accreditation. We are now bearing a mark of trust built on BBB standards. Honest advertising, transparency, honoring promises, and handling consumer concerns the right way. This recognition shows our ongoing commitment to serve you with integrity. Attorney Johnson, an experienced immigration attorney and a former U.S. Department of State consular officer with over 17 years of insider experience on both sides of the immigration process, what are your current thoughts about the impact of immigrationquestion.com is having on immigrant community and attorneys like yourself?
Well, access to information is really important, and there is a lot of information out there right now that is not accurate. It's based on rumors, and there's a lot of my consultations with people, they start off with, I saw on some random forum, and so it's really important to make sure that when you're getting information regarding your immigration situation, or even just trying to learn more about your immigration situation before you contact an attorney, you need to make sure that that information is coming from a reliable source. And immigrationquestion.com works with immigration attorneys, and that's who you need to make sure you're talking to. Immigration attorneys and government sources are your most accurate places to look for immigration information.
Everyone in Immigration Question appreciates your answer, attorney. We're glad to know that both attorneys and immigrants benefit immensely from our platform. And before we get into the live Q&A session, what are the most common mistakes or pitfalls that applicants face during the E-2 process, and how can they best avoid them?
Well, I would say not working with an attorney, an experienced E-2 attorney from the very beginning can make your application more difficult and result in you spending money that may not count towards your investment, or even investing in a business that is not ultimately going to qualify for the E-2. So working with an attorney, literally when you have the idea that you want to do this, can make a huge difference in the final product that you're able to present in your interview. And the attorney can help you make sure that everything you're spending adds value to your application, and not what they call investment padding, which are things you might buy that don't make sense for your business just to try to get to some kind of number. So if you're working with an attorney from the beginning, they can help you avoid that. Things like buying too many buying vehicles when your business necessarily need a dedicated vehicle. Those are the kind of decisions you might make before you have an attorney that result in you spending money you don't need to spend. Unfamiliarity with your business plan. As I mentioned before, it's really important. You're going to get lots of questions on your business plan. The business not being operational, that's a big one. I unfortunately have consultations with people whose E-2s have been refused, who tried it on their own, or maybe had a different attorney, and they went to the interview with the business basically just being on paper, and that does not work. This business needs to be a real thing. I've also seen, as I mentioned before, changing status. That's a big decision if you decide to change your status to E-2 in the United States, because if you leave the United States, you need that visa to return. And so you're going to have to get the visa anyway. So it's a big decision to change status that could affect your future ability to obtain other E-2 visas. And you really need to talk to an attorney about the pros and cons of changing status versus doing consular processing. And a few others, I'd say lack of physical space is not required for the E-2, but it can definitely bring legitimacy to your business if it's appropriate for your business model. And I think the last one that I have seen as far as I would say also from failed E-2s, people contacting me after they've had this experience, are partnerships. Partnerships are evaluated at a much higher standard than a sole investor. And when you have a partnership, pretty much everything is going to need to be, it will be evaluated individually in some sense. And so if your business is going to generate some employment, if it was a sole owner, if you've got two E-2 investor applicants, co-owners, you're going to need to really have a business that's going to be scalable to a much larger scale than a sole investor business.
Thank you again, Attorney Johnson. If you're just joining us, we've been having an eye-opening conversation with Attorney Tiffney Johnson on today's topic, E-2 visa success strategies from application to approval. We're now moving into our live Q&A session. So if you have a question for Attorney Johnson, now's your moment. Drop your questions in the chat or call us live at 516-703-3483. That's 516-703-3483. All right, I think we have our first question from Amma. Can I apply for E-2 if I want to start a small business like restaurant or shop?
Yes, the E-2 business model E-2 business category is very flexible, but the most important thing, it needs to be the type of business that will generate employment. That's really important. So I have people contact me sometimes that say they want to start some kind of consulting business. And those are the ones that tend to be a little more challenging to show that you've had a substantial investment and that it's going to generate employment. Whereas something like a restaurant or a retail shop, if it's at least large enough, it will definitely generate employment.
Okay, our second question is coming from Olga. How can E-2 visa last and can I renew many times?
Okay, so the actual duration of the E-2 visa is dependent on your country's reciprocity with the United States. So there are literally some countries that only issue a 3-month visa and some that issue a 5-year. But this is just the time you have to enter the United States for, that's really it. So if you're from a country that has a very low variation, that just means you have to come in very quickly. Whereas if you have a country that has a 5-year duration, you can come and go many times on that visa. But when you are admitted to the US for the first time, normally you are admitted for 2 years, period. And every time you subsequently re-enter using your visa, usually they will give you 2 years. Although when you get a little closer to your expiration date, you might start getting questions about your business by some people at the port of entry, potentially, before they give you that 2 full years. It is renewable indefinitely, but when you do renew, they're going to want to see continued growth and a reason for you to be there managing the business. So if your business is continuing to grow, you usually will not have a problem with renewals.
Thank you, Attorney. So we have another question. What type of business has better chance for E-2 approval?
Well, this kind of depends on the person. And so, for example, if you are starting a business in a field where you have worked previously, those are, that will usually help your chances of showing you are qualified. Of course, the business has, as I mentioned before, should be the type of business that's going to generate employment. So with a business that's completely service-based, sometimes that can be difficult to show. So But I would say in general, the business that has the better chance is the business that you are going to be successful running yourself. And that's different for different people.
Beautifully answered, attorney. Thank you. Let's try to see if we have more questions. Okay, can I change from tourist visa to E-2 visa inside the US?
So as I mentioned before, yes, you can do that, but you should definitely talk to an attorney first because there are pros and cons to doing this. And whether or not it's good for you, you should always talk to an attorney before you change status like that from a tourist to an E-2. Because if you have dependents outside the United States you're planning to bring here, it is quite common for your dependents to be refused their visas if you change your status in the United States. So I've seen it many times of recent, and so that is something you definitely want to think about. Also, remember that if you change your status, when you leave the United States, you will still have to get the E-2 visa and convince the consular officer that you are going to return to your home country ultimately. And if you just were issued a tourist visa, you came to the US, you waited the 90 days you're required to wait, and then you change your status, it could be difficult to convince them that you didn't have actually the intent to change your status when you applied for that visa. So you really have to be very careful when you change status to the E-2, because unlike changing to a student or something like that, for E-2, you've invested a lot of money. And so there's a lot of risk if you don't get that visa issued. So just please consult an attorney if you think you want to change your status.
All right, so we have a question from Jacob. My E-2 is denied. Can I apply again or appeal?
Well, the easiest way to appeal is to apply again. That's really the mechanism for appeal. I would not recommend applying again, though, until you've talked to an attorney and they've pinpointed what were the weak areas of your case and that those are strengthened. I've certainly worked with people who have had denials in the past who wanted to apply again, but you need to really make sure you're addressing the reasons why your case was refused. And appeal is only appropriate if you really feel like there was an error made in the case. So while I have done E-2 appeals for certain individuals who have consulted me after a denial, normally the recourse is to apply again and strengthen the application in the weak areas.
Thank you, attorney. So we have room for one more question for this live.
Okay.
Try to wait. Okay, we got one from Martha. If my business do not make profit in the first year, will I lose E-2 visa?
Okay, Martha. So it's actually, the E-2 looks a lot more at revenue in the first year rather than profit. It's very common for these businesses, even in the financial projections, to not show profit in the first year. And if you're employing people and spending money on payroll, that is what's going to be looked at in that first year of operations. You know, how much revenue are you generating? And are you kind of doing what you said you were going to do to make that business grow in the first year? So profit is not the key metric in the first year of operations. You do want to show profits in subsequent years because that's how you're going to grow the business, right? Where profits become more important is once you go to renew the visa, they definitely want to see that, you know, your business is profitable and but also that you're reinvesting in the business. So profit is kind of a tricky thing because it definitely isn't the key measure of whether or not your E-2 will be renewed. And depending on the validity period, if your country has a 5-year validity period, the standard's going to be much higher for how much you've grown that business rather than if your country only has a 2-year limit, how much you've grown the business.
Thank you so much, Attorney Johnson, for the clear and practical insights. Your perspective, especially with your background as a former consular officer, gives entrepreneurs and investors a unique advantage in understanding how to prepare for success. To our audience, thank you again for joining us. We hope this conversation is giving you clarity on E2 visa success strategies. Don't forget, at immigrationquestion.com, you can ask your immigration questions for free and get in touch with a licensed attorney who understands your case. You may also be eligible for a free confidential consultation, so head on over to www.immigrationquestion.com and sign up today. And if you want to revisit this session or share it with a colleague, you can catch a replay on Spotify. Just search Borderless Talk by immigrationquestion.com. Join us again on Wednesday for another enlightening conversation. You won't want to miss it. Once again, thank you so much, Attorney Johnson. We can't wait to have you back.
Thank you so much.